Max Holloway versus Charles Oliveira for the BMF title takes place March 7th at UFC 326. And guys, this is one of the most interesting matchups that the UFC has put on in the last couple of years. And I'll tell you why. This is a legacy defining fights for two of the most beloved UFC fighters of all time. Charles Oliveira obviously had that lightweight title run, 2021, 2022. Some people say this is one of the best times to be a UFC fan, just watching Charles Oliveira capture that gold in a crazy fashion. That comeback win against Chandler, and then the run he went on, beating Poirier, beating Gaethje, when a lot of people were doubting him, that he was a quitter, that when the times got tough, he wasn't gritty enough to, be a champion. And then after he was a champion, a lot of people doubted that he would go on the run that he went on. Obviously, he had the loss to Islam, and then things kind of got shaky from then on. But still, one of the greatest stories in MMA history was the rise of Charles Oliveira, the ups and downs of his career, and then finally capturing that gold. And then on the other side of the octagon, you got Max Holloway. Who doesn't love Max Holloway? I'm the best boxer. I'm the best boxer in the UFC, baby. One of the greatest, fan favorite fighters of all time. He has that style of, once he gets it going, that pressure heavy, volume style. Once he gets, his rhythm going, he's really, one of the most fun fighters to watch in the UFC. So that's why this matchup is a legacy defining fight. It's two of the most fan favorite fighters of all time, going at it in somewhat of their peak. I think for Max Holloway, you can definitely say that this is his prime. His move up to 155, the way he looked in the last couple of his fights, this is Max Holloway's prime. Now, for Charles Oliveira, I still think this is the latter part of his prime still. I still think that he hasn't, fallen off the cliff or anything like that. Is he as quick and fast twitch muscle as he was in 2021, 2022 in his title run? I'm not completely sure, but this is, the one thing that his last fight made sure was it convinced the fans that Charles Oliveira is still that guy, being able to beat Gamrot in the way he did and how he did it, pressuring forward and, still submitting him in the Charles Oliveira fashion way. Got the rear naked choke and finished him, and then jumped into the crowd and showed everybody that Charles Oliveira is still in this game. So you have two of the most favorite UFC fan favorite fighters in their prime for the BMF title. And one thing, the BMF, I know a lot of people hate this BMF title. They say it's a pointless title, but one thing it ensures us is that chaos will commence. There will be chaos in this fight. And one thing that when you mention chaos and you mention these two fighters, chaos benefits one of these fighters more than the other, and that is Charles Oliveira. And that's a spoiler. That's who I'm going with in this fight. A lot of people are siding with Max Holloway in this fight for particular different reasons, and I don't blame them. Max Holloway is an all-time great fighter, but I just think that there are a couple of different reasons why Charles Oliveira has the edge in this fight, in my opinion. Stylistically, that is. Charles Oliveira, especially during his run, what he proved is that he only needs one mistake from his opponents to finish this fight or start a sequence that will end the fight, right? Look at his fight against Michael Chandler, the first one that he won the title with. It just took one hook that Michael Chandler dropped his hands on in an exchange to clean him out, to finish him, right? Because contrary to popular belief, Charles Oliveira has power in his hands when he connects. He's pretty tight with his Muay Thai. All his shots are clean, tightly, great technique. He always has his hands to his chin. Very clean fighter, right? He does get hit a lot because defensively, he does lack some defensive prowess. But when he does, decide to fight in that range, he does keep it clean. Now, Charles Oliveira, like I said, only needs one mistake. Look at the mistake that Dustin Poirier made against him. When he had his hands caught, decided to roll. Now, once he rolled and Charles Oliveira got on top, he was able to tire Dustin Poirier out, and that caused Dustin Poirier to get exhausted, and Oliveira was able to land some elbows there down on the ground, and from that point forward, Poirier was a diminished fighter, and Oliveira was easily able to get that submission in that the following round. Again, I guess his fight against Gaethje, I guess his fight against Beneil Dariush, it's just one mistake that his opponent makes, which allowed Oliveira to finish this fight. Oliveira is, he's a finisher. That's one thing that we know about him. He has the most submissions in the history of the UFC. And speaking of submissions, there is a huge, huge gap in grappling and clinch exchanges between these two fighters. And that's where I think this fight will go in the middle to later rounds. I think that, once, both fighters get their rhythm going, I think Charles Oliveira would do a lot of fence work, a lot of trips, body locks, and going for those back takes, and that's where I think there's a huge gap. Because Max Oliveira, as long as he's been fighting, he hasn't faced the grappler to the level of Oliveira at the highest level. So all his championship runs, Max Holloway he hasn't faced an elite grappler. Elite grappler that also, I mean, he did face Ortega, but elite grappler who also is able to impose his will. So someone that's an offensive grappler, not just someone who can, once the fight is down on the ground, can shoot up submissions from their back and things like that. A triangle. Ortega, he has a couple of sleek, sneaky submission moves that he throws on the ground, but nowhere to the level of Oliveira. So I think this fight, a lot of this fight will be happening in grappling exchanges and clinch exchanges, and I just think there's a huge gap in level between Max Holloway and Charles Oliveira in that aspect, and that's where a lot of the problem lies for Max Holloway, right? And lastly, like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I believe that this is a BMF title fight, so you know what that means. It's going to be a lot of chaos and a lot of wild exchanges and scrambles, and it's going to be, a messy fight within the fight. They're both elite. This won't be a sloppy fight, to no question. This won't be a Paddy Pimblett versus Gaethje fight. This won't be sloppy. This will be two elite strikers at the highest level, right? I think at this point, Oliveira has cleaned up his game to where we could say, besides his defensive, limitations, he is an elite striker because he's able to mix up his striking game, with the kicks, with the, oblique kicks, with a lot of different styles that these two have. These are two well-rounded strikers, but once that chaos comes into play, that only favors Oliveira, right? So, Max, he can win. Let's be real. Max can absolutely win this fight. If he keeps range, if he tries to avoid the clinch, and when he gets going, if he has a lot of volume, high volume, to where you can accumulate damage and win by decision, that is possible. But that's a hard game to do for 25 minutes against Charles Oliveira. Like, if you look at Charles Oliveira's losses in the championship 5-round level, as of recent, has been to two guys, Islam Makhachev and Ilya Topuria. Now, these guys won because they were able to get him out of here quickly. In the first 2 rounds, they were able to find that finish, which I don't think Max can do. Max hasn't, been notorious for being a quick finisher. He's someone, who puts a pace on you and typically wins the fight over a 5-round fight. He had Calvin Kattar hurt, in that fight against him, and still wasn't able to finish him. So I think that, Max got some of the best boxing in the game. Elite striking. He's added a lot of, that oblique kick that he has, that spinning kick that he's perfected over the last few years. That will, make this pretty competitive, right? But I don't think it will be enough to win this fight. So I think no disrespect to Max. He's he's an all-time great, but I just think that Charles is way too comfortable in the chaos. He's too complete of a fighter. His grappling mixed with his Muay Thai striking that he's perfected. It's great to see how comfortable Charles was in his last fight against Gamrot in his striking and able to apply that pressure. If he applies a similar game plan right here, I think that will be his best route to win. So who do you have? Oliveira or Gamrot? I think this is going to be one of those fights that will divide the fan base. I think a lot of it's going to be a lot of people on Max Holloway's side. It's going to be people on Charles Oliveira's sides. So I just want to hear what you guys think. Like, subscribe, comment, all that, and let me know what you guys think down below.